kind of weird, which is why we're talking about it, because it's kind of cool as well. So if you kind of recall, in this class we're trying to tease out culture, and we know it's learned human behavior, right? That's like the big general, broad-based view that we're taking of culture. But also, we want to talk about the fact that it's constructed. We know that we create culture, right? We're not born with it. It's not innate. We know that it depends upon our worldview and perception, or others' worldview and perception. One example of that is we looked at the traditional practice of Chinese foot binding. Do you remember that? And when you look back upon it with our own cultural view, quite frankly, it seems kind of barbaric, right? Like you're going to like break young girls' feet and break their bones and have them grown misshapen. But of course, when you look at it within that particular worldview, at the time, it definitely falls into line and has a little bit more context. We know that culture evolves. It's always changing. One example of this is I was driving down Colorado Boulevard the other day, and I saw a couple of those old phone booths. Do you remember those? Like an actual like phone with a cord, and they're all like the phones are gone. They're just like a shell of a booth, but like the cords are gone. There's no phone. I guess they're defunct, right? No one uses those anymore. We're sort of in a flux of how people use phones, and we also know that culture is historically contextual. When you watched the video last time of Staying Alive, you know, and the guys were like cruising with their tight pants, you know, I heard a couple of you chuckle, okay? Because when you look at past cultures, sometimes they seem hopelessly out of date. That's because they're within their own historical context, which probably isn't your own at the time you might be studying that particular cultural event. So we're going to look at worldview a little more in detail today. Worldview, what is it? It's literally how you view the world, how you view it, not necessarily by sight, but how you understand or conceive of the world. That's your worldview. And it affects your behavior, which means it's a cultural thing. Okay? You maybe have heard the saying, someone has rose-colored glasses, right? Or maybe you have heard the saying that somebody sees things as the glass half empty, right? Or the glass half full. It's kind of how you see the world, your take on it, your attitude, perhaps. And worldviews are really important because it affects everything. Religion, it might affect economic activity, political activity. It affects how you see the world in every way. So it's very important to culture. And no two cultures have the same worldview. Okay? I mentioned before an example of this. No two cultures have the same worldview. Have you ever tried to have a conversation with a friend or a family member about some really controversial topic? Maybe it's the war in Iraq, or maybe it's abortion rights. And you might have a conversation with someone, and they're never going to understand what you're saying. They might understand your point, but they're never going to agree with you, right? You just have two different world views on a subject, right? Okay? And that affects everything in culture. It's like those of you who wear prescriptive lenses, okay? So Tommy, if I were to take your glasses and wear them, even though I already have contacts in my eyes right now, I wouldn't be able to see anything, right? Because your prescription is not my prescription, right? If you put on my contacts, that'd be gross. Also, you wouldn't be able to see. It'd be super blurry for you, okay? Worldviews are the same. Okay? I will never be able to know what your worldview is on an issue. I'll never be able to know it because I'm not from your culture, right? And similarly, you'll never be able to understand my worldview about something, okay? And we see this across cultures. Now, that doesn't mean that we're in an impasse for compromise and understanding each other and awareness. It just means you have to understand that these different worldviews exist when you come to an issue, when you come to the table, okay, to have some sort of arbitration or collaboration. Here's a great example of how worldviews differ, okay? I'm going to play you a video of a folk song. This was popular a few years ago. And it's a song which kind of rips or plays a little bit on these stereotypes of how conservatives and liberals see the world. Okay? And you'll notice that a lot of times our different worldviews can be and are, quite frankly, stereotyped.
Conservative Christian, right-wing Republican, straight white American male, gay bashing, black fearing, war fighting, tree killing, regional leaders of sale, frat housing, cake tapping, shirt tucking, back slapping, haters of hippies like me, tree hugging, peace loving, pot smoking, porn watching, lazy ass hippies like me, tree hugging, love making, pro-choice and gay wedding, widespread digging hippies like me. Skin color blinded, conspiracy minded, protesters of corporate greed. We who have nothing, and most likely will till we all end up locked up in jail by conservative Christian, right-wing Republican, straight white American man. Diamonds and dogs, boys and girls, living together in two separate worlds, following leaders up mountains of shame, looking for someone to blame.
So clearly, this video, right, it is not correct. Okay? Right? They're making very broad-based assumptions about what a liberal is and what a conservative is. Right? They're making broad generalizations about religious views, political views, race views, which aren't necessarily the case. However, it does illustrate that we put each other in these different worldviews. And quite frankly, we are coming from different worldviews. Right? Our political ideology, and all of us have political ideologies, they do help to shape our worldview, okay? And that affects how we live in the world, so that does affect our culture.
Tree hugging, peace loving, pot smoking, barefoot, and folk singing hippies like me. Tree hugging, peace loving, pot smoking, porn watching, lazy ass hippies like me.
So it's just if we take a look at political ideologies and how they differ, it is a good example of where you can come with somebody to the table and you're trying to talk about an issue, right? Whether it's a political issue like war or a social issue like women's rights. And quite frankly, we all come to the tables with very different worldviews, okay? And that's a cultural thing, all right? Now, how does this play into our understanding, or cultural geographers' understanding of the world and how to make sense of it? So we know that worldview is important, and if we're going to study the world and how culture differs, we need to be cognizant of the fact that we're coming to the table with a worldview, and cultural geographers need to do that, which means they're always going to have a bias. Okay? It's very hard to take your mind out of your worldview because it's a cultural thing and it colors everything that you see. So cultural geographers are interested in studying culture that's really there. What do we mean by that? Oh, the distribution of ethnicity or the distribution of religious groups and how that changes over time. But imagined geography is also important, and this is where things get a little weird, get a little out there. That's what people think is there. What people think is there. For example, if you think that your neighborhood is really safe, but it really isn't, but you think it's safe, that's going to affect your behavior. Whether or not you lock your doors at night, whether or not you leave your windows open at night, okay? Your general feeling about walking your dog through your neighborhood, perhaps, okay? Even if it's not really true, even if the data shows that your neighborhood is average when it comes to crime, if you think your neighborhood is safe, it's going to affect your behavior. And if it affects your behavior, it affects your culture, right? So geographers are also interested in studying what people think is there. Okay? And that's where this imagined geography plays into the field. Geosophy is part of that. It's where cultural geographers are looking at all points of view. Okay? It's where cultural geographers try to get rid of their worldview, even though we know that's pretty impossible. Okay? And look at an issue from all types of worldviews. And that can become really important. Because anytime we have a conflict over an issue, we're trying to, as a human race, arrive at a decision that's beneficial. That's the best decision, right? Maybe the right decision, if that even exists. And if you can take a look at an issue from all perspectives or all points of view, you're probably more likely to reach the compromise that is best for everyone if you're able to at least take in all worldviews. Okay, and geosophy is part of that. More time here? Okay, a few of you. So we're going to look at the difference between imaginative and empirical geography. Empirical geography is that geography that's based on facts. Like, we can map these facts. Like, how many crimes occur in this area, and what does that have to say about the socioeconomic status of an area, perhaps? Right? That's data. Okay? That's empirical. But other things are imagined. Like how you feel, how safe you feel in your town or your city. Okay, that has to do more with perception, necessarily, than empirical forms of data. And I'll give you specific examples of each. So, there are two types of cultural knowledge, this imaginative kind and this empirical kind, right? The empirical kind is the kind that can be mapped, right? If it's data and it can be mapped, it's empirical. That's always the default, if you can map it. And if you can't, well, it might necessarily be based in data. It might be how you perceive things. And we'll take a look at some maps of perceived safety in your neighborhood. How many of you, by show of hands, would say that you live in a safe neighborhood? Okay. How many of you, by show of hands, would say you live in a dangerous neighborhood? Okay, so probably about 50, 50, 50. Okay. And a lot of that has to do with your worldview, right? With like how you were taught. If your parents were constantly saying, shut the door, there's strangers out there that will snatch you away. Or your grandmother, don't go out at night because you're going to get shot. Okay? Some of that's learned human behavior. It shaped your worldview. Okay? So we're going to look at the difference and look at specific examples of empirical knowledge, stuff that's factual, that's easy. And then imaginative knowledge. This is when things get a little crazy. Okay? Well, it's not necessarily data-based, but quite frankly, it doesn't matter. Because if you see the world that way, that's how you interact with the world. Do you remember when we drew those sketch maps of the world, probably 3 lectures ago? Right? And some of your maps of the world were really wonky. Right? But it didn't really matter. Because that's in your mind's eye how you saw the world. For some of you, maybe it's just because you weren't really good at drawing. Right? But it doesn't matter if that's how you see the world. That's going to impact your ability to think about the world, and that's powerful. More time here. I think this will become a little more clear when we look at some specific examples. Okay, so there is some relationship between what is perceived or imagined in geography and what is real or empirical. And believe it or not, there are cultural geographers who study imagined geography. You're probably thinking, like, how can you study something that's imaginary? That's really, really weird, okay? Well, you can get grants, and people pay you to study things that are imagined because they end up making a difference in the real world, believe it or not. We'll talk about that in terms of, like, Second Life and the internet and virtual reality and how that's not the real world, but it ends up mattering in the real world, believe it or not. So here's an example. Imagined areas are always bigger than empirical ones. Some of you have had this experience like in your dreams, like you're dreaming about a place, right, and you're moving around in that place, okay, and your dream seemed like it went on forever, maybe, but your dream was only a few minutes, okay? So imagined realities or imagined geographies tend to be always bigger than real life. Also, the geography that people have in their mind that's imagined, maybe it's the geography of their neighborhood or the geography in a dream or the geography of a place they visited when they were young, tends to be much more extensive than it really is. Okay? How many of you saw the post on Facebook about that guy who found his childhood home through Google Earth? Did I post it on your site? Maybe just like that was like my other Facebook nerdy group for scientists. There's this guy in India who was an orphan, and he remembered when he was like 4 or 5 going on this train to leave his hometown, and he remembered these mountains and this forest but he had no documentation of where he was from, where he was born, and he used Google Earth to finally track down landmarks, and he actually found where he was born, right? And so some of that, is filling in the gaps in terms of a memory. And he was able to use Google Earth to fill in the gaps that his imagined geography didn't have all of it, but it had enough to find his home. It's kind of cool. Now, you might say, I'm a real fact-based person. You might think, I really don't rely on imagined geographies. I'm a fact-based. I look at maps. I don't need this. But the degree to which you're going to use either one probably depends on the culture of where you're from. Okay? In some cultures, imagined geographies, for example, in the form of stories, okay, or oral tradition, are really, really important. Okay? Something that comes to mind is like the chupacabra, right? Like when it comes out and where it goes, and this can be very important to some cultures. Okay? So the degree to which you're going to be using imagined geographies or empirical geographies is going to be different. And they're both important. Now, imaginative geography, quite frankly, is harder to get your mind wrapped around, so we're going to look at some examples of that. Number one, we'll look at some maps of how people perceive or imagine the geography of inner city streets, how people perceive their hometown, the story of El Dorado. I think this turned into a Disney movie. Okay, well, we'll talk about the real El Dorado. And then we'll talk about fantasy and internet, and that plays into Second Life. Any of you on Second Life? Your first life is too complex, you don't need a second one? Or the idea of Sims. Any of you played The Sims, SimCity? And there's probably other ones too. So we'll talk about that. Okay, the first thing. Example of imagined geography. So there was a study that was done with individuals who lived in the inner city. And they were asked to identify, first of all, draw where they lived, and then identify areas where they were more fearful. And you're just drawing little sketch maps, just like you did in class. And basically, the nitty-gritty is that they drew like the streets where they felt they were unsafe, they made them longer. Their imagined geography made them much longer than those streets really were in reality. And this kind of makes sense, right? You know when you're doing something you really hate, it like seems like the time takes forever, right? Well, the similar case was here. When these individuals felt really unsafe walking down a street, it felt like the street was longer to them. It was their imagined geography filling in the blanks. And the streets in which they felt safe, they actually drew more accurately to the real world. So our imagined geographies tend to make things longer, okay, and more discrete, more detailed than they really are. And we'll take a look at these maps for examples. More time here? Okay, no problem. Questions, clarifications? So imagine geography are spatial relationships that you make up in your head, okay, that aren't necessarily based in reality, but they affect how you live in the real world. So that's why they matter. Anyone else more time? Okay, here's an example. So this is the study that was done. This is in a neighborhood in North Philadelphia, okay? And residents were asked to circle areas. They had these little sketch maps to circle areas where they thought that they were more afraid. And this is indicated, the darker, right, these dark black blobs are the areas where they were most afraid. And then as they get from hashed to the dotted, it's a little bit safer. And then where there's no bubbles around the area at all, they were perfectly fine. Okay, so these are the areas that they indicated. And there's definitely a spatial pattern here, right? Anyone see anything that's jumping out at you that there's some sort of pattern going on here? What do you see? Are these areas of perceived stress just like everywhere and they're totally random? Absolutely. The comment is, it looks like there's 2 blocks, right? And they parallel each other. There's this street here, and then there's this street here. So what's going on? That could be a street where a particular gang, right? It's their territory, perhaps. And is there some connectivity between these 2 areas? Right. You kind of have more stress level on the corners, right? Towards one end and the other end, and one end here and the other end here. Why might that be? Maybe they're rival gangs. Why would the most stressful areas be here in each case on the corners? What does that say about the distribution of? Yeah, it might be. Right, it might be that block radius of where they are. Maybe the scary individuals live on the edge to kind of rein in that territory, right? If we were to walk around this area and look for graffiti, we might see clusters of graffiti in these areas as well, right? And we'll do a walking field trip to take a look at that a little bit later in class. And it looks like there is some connectivity between these areas too, right? Where individuals feel safe here, but not here. So the question is this. When people are walking down this street, what's their experience and how is it different than when they're walking down this street? Okay? The hypothesis would say that which one felt longer to them? The scary one, right? That's the hypothesis. And that's what the data showed in that study, that the streets that they indicated were the most unsafe, they felt they were the longest. Here's a different case. This isn't necessarily a neighborhood that's supposed to be perceived as scary at all. This is a home area in Illinois. And different individuals, college students, were asked to just draw their area, their home area, okay? And this is the correct map of the home area, okay? And then here are 2 other maps of the same home area, okay? And, you know, they're dramatically different, aren't they, these 2 maps? Because each of them had a mental map, their own imagined geography. And that depends upon their culture. For example, this individual here, right, thought that the hospital, okay, and the theater and the mall were all really, really close together. Okay, perhaps they frequent these quite a bit. Or perhaps this individual had a car, and they could drive, and it seemed like it didn't take very long. Now, this individual felt that, right, the mall and the theater were very, very far apart, right? Maybe that individual walks, right? That individual had to take the bus, and it took longer for them, and so that impacted how they see the world and how they see geography. Okay. Now, even though the individual's maps weren't correct,
because this is the correct map, right? It doesn't really matter that the maps that they drew were incorrect because it was their perceived reality. It was real for them. It's how they experience culture moving about in their world. Okay? So our perception is important, and it's an imagined thing. Here's a blown-up map of that. Here's the original. Okay? Right? This one is way off. Right? This downtown area is all very close together, and everything else is very far apart for this individual. Okay? Here's another example. Same area, skewed, though, differently. Okay? At different imagined geographies. And that does help to illustrate we have different worldviews. Okay, the next case is El Dorado. How many of you have seen that movie about, it was like a Disney El Dorado? Okay, full disclosure, I haven't seen that movie. But I probably will at some point since I have children as they grow up. So this, El Dorado is like the classic case of imagined geography. Crazy stuff, right? Tons of countries spent tons of money. People lost their lives. Explorers kept looking and looking, trying to find this city of gold. And we need some historical context to understand this. So, of course, gold was really one of the biggest forces that helped colonial expansion. Okay, there was a search for gold, the search for riches, the search for resources, and gold helped to fund that. And so, man, people got worked up, and they imagined a whole city. They just imagined it. It didn't exist. We'll talk about what really did exist in reality. They called it El Dorado, right? It was supposed to be the city of gold. And if you could just find the city of gold, you would have unlimited resources, unlimited money to really do whatever you wanted if you were a country. Okay? So there were many, many expeditions that were sent out to find this city of gold. And quite frankly, all of these different explorers that went out, this helped the greater goal of exploration of the Western Hemisphere. And it was the Spanish that was mainly leading these expeditions. Okay, so there was this golden city. And you might say, like, how could people get worked up about a city that didn't exist? Well, because it was put on maps. And maps are seen as, like, really credible things. If it's mapped, then it's real. For example, the LA City Council the past few weeks, have you heard what's been going on with protests there? Who's been protesting the LA City Council? Nobody reads the LA Times? Someone's all upset about maps. What maps are they? Yeah, the redistricting maps. Everybody's all upset about these redistricting maps. Because when you put something on a map, all of a sudden, it is real. It's right? You look at maps and you think, that's really credible. If somebody put it on a map, it must really exist. Which is why it's so frustrating when MapQuest leads you astray. Right? You're like, MapQuest, how could you tell me to turn on this street that doesn't exist? Okay, here's an example of all of the various expeditions by Coronado. Given here in red, these are the main expeditions that he took looking for this city of gold. Okay, and then there were some secondary expeditions as well. This helped to vastly expand territories in the 1500s. By the late 16th century, still hadn't been found. And again, this is before phones, the internet. It was hard to get information across. But the Spanish had looked all over, right, Mexico, all over the southwestern, what is now the U.S., hadn't found it. So they thought, well, where's the last place we haven't really looked? And it was kind of in the Amazon. They said, oh, it's got to be there, because we haven't looked there. Because it definitely exists, it's on maps. So many more expeditions were set to find the city of gold in the late 1500s. More time here? Nope. So, what was the story then? Well, there are a number of different players here. But if we take a look at the experience in the early U.S., Sir Walter Raleigh, he was one of the prominent leaders of Jamestown. He heard about this. He's like, oh, people were talking about El Dorado. And he thought, well, hey, if we were able to find it, that would be great. And so he decided he knew where it was, somewhere where the Venezuela-Guyana border is now. Why? Again, why are people making up this place and making up where it is? Well, because they looked everywhere else. And they thought, we know it exists, so it just has to be in that one place we haven't looked yet. Okay? So, as a result, he himself launched expeditions 1595 and 1660 and found nothing. Okay? This led to his execution in part. There were some other reasons as well. So it was like colossal failure, right? No one had found El Dorado. But it was on these maps. And man, countries put tons of money into finding it because it was this imagined geography. So if we take a look at a map here, individuals had looked pretty much everywhere, okay? Pretty much everywhere, except this portion of South America. So this is where the searches started to concentrate into. And if you look at the 1630s, even though it still hadn't been found yet, it was so ingrained into the culture that it was put on maps. This is an atlas of the world. It was called the Grand Atlas. And it's the largest atlas ever printed. It was over 600 maps. It's still larger than any, for example, National Geographic Atlas. And do you see this little sort of area right here? Manoa, El Dorado, right? This is it. This is the city of gold. It's right there. Okay? And if the National Geographic Society, imagine this is them at the time, said, here's this city of gold, well, you're going to believe them, right? So individuals believe this imagined geography as well. Here I go. I'm zooming into it now. You see it? There it is. There's El Dorado. And so I don't know how the Disney story turned out, but this is the imagined geography of El Dorado. Okay, this is an artifact from a museum. And you might say, oh, they found it, and they found artifacts from El Dorado. No, this is what different cultures imagined El Dorado to be like. So they made their own artifacts of gold. They said, this is what we're going to find there. Oh, they never did. So you might say, well, what was there? This is the town that was where El Dorado was supposedly supposed to be. And there, of course, was a town there, and they creatively enough named themselves El Dorado, in part after the legend, the imagined geography. I want to show you a short video clip which sort of illustrates to you what the real El Dorado is. Okay? You'll see there's a big difference between the imagined and the reality, unfortunately.
Welcome to El Dorado, the fabled city of gold. A town so decadent, so dependent on miners for its very existence that it doesn't even realize the economic disaster that it's foreboding.
When you fly to Venezuela and you drive there like 15 hours through Nowheresville, it's fucking the jungle, man.
One of the first things you see is some pile of brush on fire on the side of the road, like a welcome. You're thinking, wow, this looks foreboding. And then a sign that says El Dorado that's about as beat up as you could possibly imagine. And then what do we see? El Dorado.
It's not exactly the vision that you would expect.
El Dorado, the mythical city of gold. The Spanish Empire searched for 500 years to find it. They never could. With Vice, 3 plane tickets, 2 rental cars, and 1 Swiss hornblower, we tracked it down. The only problem is, everybody who's got a water hose or a little vat of mercury is found it as well, as you're soon to see. In the myth of El Dorado, it was unfindable. Now, obviously, this is not the mythological El Dorado. They just happen to have a good sense of humor and named it that. It's like the Venice of South America, Venezuela. They're mostly buying gasoline to run the endless supply of generators that are at every job site. Gasoline costs nothing, so everybody's got a little, gasoline generator to create electricity. They buy a few little food staples and things like that. Then these little motor taxis, takes what they bought up to them. You can see the price is determined by how far the boat has to go. Right over there is a nice little lista.
So we got on the boat to ostensibly check out what the lay of the land looked like. There's a lot of mines apparently located on the edge of the riverbanks because the closer you are, the easier it is to do business.
City of Gold's got to be here somewhere. So here's El Dorado. Interesting that the prison is just across the river. One of the telltale signs of a mine right along the river is a pump in the water, one of these little floating pumps that pumps water up. They mix the water with the earth and they grind it into this slurry, and then the water runs of course back in here. After they got a little mercury and a little dazzle in the water.
Mercury is widely used in makeshift gold mining operations around the world. The problem is it's extraordinarily toxic. It's dangerous to your central nervous system, your endocrine system, and every single one of your vital organs.
Just 4 years ago, the water here was perfectly clean. Nowadays, they're warning people, the government, not to eat the fish. It's a real tragedy. But the poor people, they have no idea. Of course, they're eating the fish, selling the fish. We've really got no choice. Even bathing in the water is extremely dangerous. It's really kind of a tragic story here, despite the fact that there is a lot of gold in the ground. 10% of the world's gold reserves are here in this part of Venezuela. It's a beautiful place. It's a real shame that the water's just fucking poison. What? You're good?
So essentially, this community named themselves El Dorado really wasn't the mythical city of gold. Now, do areas around in this geographical area have gold? Yes, they do, right? But they're definitely not well off at all, right? In any sense of the word. In many ways, they're worse for the wear because of that, okay? But there's the imagined geography of it, right? And then there's the reality of it, okay? But that imagined geography was powerful enough to fuel, right, 500 years of searching. Now, with Type the Rise of Technology, we have these new geographies that have popped up, and one of these is Second Life. I saw one of you has had a experience in Second Life. This was popular for some time, never really picked up steam so much. For those of you who aren't familiar with Second Life, here's a brief kind of primer on that. It's just a short news clip.
Imagine a city that's grown by 500,000 people in a month. This is Second Life, not a real place, but a virtual online world where participants lead fantasy lives.
In total, 1.5 million people have created fictional versions of themselves here. That's enough people to fill Birmingham and Edinburgh. And here's where fiction meets reality. They're spending real money. From Second Life, Rory Kethman-Jones reports.
Fly with me into a whole new world. This rather strange looking fella is my avatar, my virtual me in Second Life. Let's drop in on one of the residents. Andy spends a lot of time in this world which the residents built for themselves. Here's what he looks like in real life when he's a college lecturer. At first it's difficult to see the point of Second Life, but Andy says there's an awful lot you can do.
There's endless scope for creativity, for exploration, for building friendships, for pushing the boundaries of possibilities, really. But yes, if you can imagine it, you can do it in Second Life, and that's the fun.
Residents pay real money to buy land and can earn cash by selling virtual goods. Justin here has built a whole business in this world. His firm in London's East End designs virtual offices and equipment for companies now rushing to establish a presence in Second Life.
People are in there, they're making real livings by buying and selling virtual land and creating product for people so they can adorn their avatars in clothing or performing services. For instance, there's wedding planners in there, there's people who actually do live performance of music in there.
But as my virtual self here has been finding out, Second Life is suffering from growing pains. Land prices are soaring, a nasty computer bug swept through at the weekend, making all of us feel ill. and some of the long-term residents aren't too keen on all these newcomers. One old-timer who showed me some of the sites wasn't particularly bothered about the commercialisation of Second Life, but was dubious about the motives of some new immigrants.
People come here almost expecting they have a right to make a real life living, I think, without appreciating actually it's a job. The people that make real life livings here work really hard for it.
After a couple of days here, I'm still trying to work out just what the attraction is. But right now, this is the hottest place in cyberspace. Rory Catherine-Jones, BBC News in Second Life.
See, Rory's Douglas turned into a bit of a hunk.
So in Second Life, essentially, you can make a new you, right? There are dolphin people in there, and people look like cats, and you can make yourself look like whatever you want. But people are doing real things in virtual reality. For example, people in Second Life are attending church. People are selling goods, right? There's an economy in Second Life. For example, this woman makes a living by designing virtual clothing, okay? And individuals actually buy the clothing, all right? So people are spending, real money, for example, in an imagined place.
It's been a continual struggle since I started doing this, trying to come up with the perfect one-line answer to what do you do for a living?
I run a shop. I create clothing that doesn't really exist.
On July 22nd, 2003, Casey Nafis joined Second Life as Nephilim protagonist. She currently lives there with over 28,000 people from around the world. In Second Life's online virtual world, people build houses, drive cars, and fly through the air. They open stores, buy and sell virtual goods, even exchange their virtual money for real dollars to spend here in the real world. They hang out, make friends, and fall in love. They can change anything about themselves and their world at any time. They can continually create their own ideal world.
So essentially, for some of you, it's kind of easy to write off, well, I'd never buy anything that wasn't real, right? You've never spent money on virtual clothes, perhaps. But would you attend church? Would you, if you didn't want to, or would you attend class? Perhaps. People attend class in Second Life. People attend church. People attend rock concerts, for example, in Second Life. And there are more and more churches that are using virtual ways, right, these virtual geographies of having real communities. Here's an example of how religion is participating.
Now we turn to a growing trend in this country, real religion, though in a virtual world. One of the fastest growing sites on the internet is a 3D world called Second Life. Just as in real life, good and evil both exist in Second Life, and religion is finding a way there too. But is virtual religion real religion? Here is NBC's Don Teague.
God sees more inside.
For Jeff and Desiree Click in Oklahoma City, it's a typical Sunday at church.
Verse 12 says,
While 800 miles away, Nathan Carline is attending the same church in virtual reality.
I just get up in my PJs, turn the computer on, and I'm right there.
In a computer-generated secular world called Second Life, where more than 6 million people interact and explore virtual cities. Some rated PG, many are for adults only. But this strange world where humans can fly is also a new religious frontier.
Jesus' name.
Where real-life churches, synagogues, and mosques are trying to gain a foothold.
When Jesus told us as a church to go into all the world, we took it very literally. God personalized it for you.
Life Church, an evangelical megachurch, has invested thousands of real dollars to build a presence in Second Life. Its Sunday services are now live in both worlds.
Life Church is basically the same church, whether it's in the real world or the virtual world. The big difference in Second Life is the people. For example, here, I'm much cooler.
In Second Life, our virtual selves can be male or female, human or not. This man came to church as a cheetah wearing shorts and told me he only feels accepted here, where he can be whatever he wants.
I've been to many churches in real life, and none of them give me the satisfaction as a virtual church.
But is this really church?
The church cannot be the church without flesh and blood interaction.
Elaine Heath is an ordained minister and professor at Southern Methodist University.
We have to be in our communities living out our faith together.
Still, Nathan Carline says the message is the same. He hasn't been to real church since finding faith in Second Life. Don Teague, NBC News, Oklahoma City.
So as technology continues to increase and imagined geographies become more and more common, we're going to have to figure out how we can navigate our way around these worlds. And what is your take with this? Are these valid? Can you really attend church in Second Life? Does it count? Someone says yes. Do you believe it's okay? Cheetah Boy can show up in shorts and that works? What do you think?
I think like the whole concept of it is kind of sort of a facade. It's an illusion basically. It's not real. So I wouldn't care for it.
So it's an illusion. It's not real, and that's what imagined geographies are. They are an illusion. But sometimes illusions can be just as real and meaningful, right, if they change your behavior, perhaps. Other ideas, what do you think? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So maybe this is therapeutic, right? Maybe if First Life didn't work out so well, you got Second Life, right? There you can be a virtual entrepreneur, or there you can attend a church as Cheetah Boy, or go to the adult-only section of Second Life and be a studette, or whatever, perhaps. But you know, these virtual geographies, you're going to have to decide whether or not you want to play in that sandbox or not, right? And why? Is it worth your time to do anything in virtual geographies? Is that meaningful to you?
Not really, because while I'm sitting on my computer playing that game, I could be going out in the real world and achieving what I wanted to do.
Right, so the comment is maybe your participation in a virtual way isn't as meaningful to your participation in a flesh and blood way.
It may be meaningful to me, but it's not meaningful to the world.
It might be meaningful to you, but not to the world. Can you have meaningful interactions in a virtual way? Do you have meaningful interactions on Facebook without seeing your friends or family? Could you? Right, so you've already known them in the flesh and blood way, so it's easier to meet them in an imagined space that's not real and have... Right. Right, right. So something that you started somewhere else. And so can you attend church in a virtual way? Does it still count in a sense? Maybe it depends on the person. Maybe it depends on their own culture. Probably in some cultures, this might not fly, right? These virtual spaces. Absolutely, right? You turn on your TV, you watch the Sunday Mass. Perhaps, right, it might be. What about 100% online classrooms? I teach in 100% online classrooms. I never see my students in flesh and blood. They send me YouTube videos, and I watch them, and I make YouTube videos for them. It's an imagined classroom. My classroom with them doesn't actually exist. Does that mean that they're not getting general education, gen ed requirements? They are. Which are going to lead to real degrees or fake degrees? Wow, so something that we're doing in an imagined space that doesn't really exist is having an impact in their real life. You see how these lines get blurry, right? They get blurry really quick, and in your lifetime, they're probably going to get even more blurred, right? Okay.
About education, though, is that there's guidelines, and in these virtual worlds, I'm not sure if there are any oversights. So what if you have like people who are like pathological or sick?
Right.
In a world full of like rape.
Right. Right, absolutely. A wonderful point here made by Doug that in the virtual world, just like in the real world, there are bad people, right? And in a classroom environment, theoretically, you have a teacher who's of sound mind who will outline the do's and don'ts, the rules of the road, if you will. But we all know that in other arenas that are virtual, it's kind of like the Wild West, right? We know now that there's been some awareness around cyberbullying, right? And that's clearly unacceptable. But what about pedophiles, right? That are online, right? I'm thinking Chris Hansen, To Catch a Predator, right? Or we don't really have rules of the road yet, do we? In these virtual spaces, so there can be dangers or dangerous people, just quite frankly as there is in the real world, right? Other comments or concerns about these virtual geographies? As something like Second Life rolls out, people actually create virtual property in Second Life. And if you notice here, the geography of Second Life properties is very similar to the Palm Jumeirah. Where's the Palm Jumeirah? Yeah, right, Dubai. Remember, Dubai made their own islands? Right? And the islands were in the shape of kind of like this. Yeah, kind of like this, and then this is why didn't major in art. Okay? And they did that because they wanted everyone to have beachfront property, right? Right? Everyone, okay. And now that's real life. Well, in Second Life, you can see all the canals everywhere. The same sort of geography is coming to play in this fake environment because everyone wants to have beachfront property. Okay? So you can kind of see how the virtual is trying to kind of mirror what's actually going on in real life. And so cultural geographers are really interested in these virtual geographies about how people are using these spaces. For example, right now, there are dating websites, right, like Match.com and eHarmony and JDate. And usually it leads to people going on real face-to-face dates. But before that, there's like a virtual exchange of messages, right? Like you get to know people before you meet them in the flesh to decide if they're a weirdo or not, right? Before you want to meet them in the flesh. And so there is already some imagined spaces like, let's go in a chat room. Let's have a private chat. Where's that private chat? Is this some virtual couch somewhere? I mean, we're already creating imagined geographies right now. And so figuring out those rules of the road and looking at how they change your behavior is something that's all kind of playing out right now. So imagine geography, there's more to that story. Questions, clarifications, or concerns about this lecture? Okay,